So I'd like to introduce, without further ado, the president of the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, a wonderful friend, fellow freedom warrior, John Carpay. Big hand for John. Big, big, big. Come on.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you for the great introduction. It's an honor for me to be here with citizens. We right now are exercising our charter freedoms, our fundamental rights and freedoms, our freedom of expression, our freedom of peaceful assembly, our freedom of association. We're in dark times because it seems that our mayor, our city councillors, our premier, our MLAs, our prime minister, the chief medical officers seem to have forgotten about our charter rights and freedoms. Under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, a government, whether federal, provincial, municipal, a government can only violate freedoms temporarily in a narrow fashion to deal with a crisis, and there are restrictions and limitations on those violations. When we were told in March that there was a virus that was going to kill millions of people around the world, and not just people in their 80s and 70s and 90s, but it was going to kill lots of young people. It was going to inflict permanent lung damage on huge numbers of young people. Do you remember that? Millions of people were going to get killed, and this was a threat to everybody, not just seniors. It was a threat to everybody. It was going to overwhelm the healthcare system. Remember that? We were just doing this temporarily to flatten the curve. And they said one thing in March that was actually true. They said, we cannot stop a virus from making its way through society. That was one piece of truth that was said in March, right? Remember that? It's like, we can't stop the virus. We're just trying to control the spread. We're just trying to slow it down. We got to flatten the curve. We got to make sure the hospitals are not being overwhelmed. So I heard that and I thought, well, it sounds reasonable to me. You know, if you go onto the website of the Justice Center, www.jccf.ca, and you look at our news releases, you're not going to find any news releases in March that were denouncing the lockdowns, because at that time it seemed like a reasonable proposition to have a temporary shutdown for 2 weeks, not to stop the virus entirely, because back then we seemed to know that you cannot do that. I mean, name me one example of one country, one province, one civilization in history that has ever succeeded in completely stopping a virus. I mean, it's impossible. And they said in March it's impossible to stop the virus entirely. Although now, fast forward 8 months, where are we at now? Well, today we know more, and there is no valid basis for violating our charter rights and freedoms today. There's no valid basis for it. And I'm challenging Dina Hinshaw and Jason Kenney and Justin Trudeau and Mayor Nenshi and all of our elected representatives to look at your own data. First thing we were told in March, millions of people were going to die of coronavirus. Millions of people. Not true. This is not a pandemic on the scale of the Spanish flu, 1918 to 1920, which killed 17 million, 20 million, some historians say 50 million, 100 million people killed in the Spanish flu. Jason Kenney has publicly compared COVID to the Spanish flu on numerous occasions, which is a disgrace. That is fear-mongering. Shame on the fear-mongering. We need facts, not fear-mongering. They said in March that millions of people were going to die, but this is not the Spanish flu, nor is it the Asian flu of 1957, which killed over 2 million people. Nor was it the Asian flu of 1950, the Hong Kong flu of 1958. Once every so often, you get a really vicious virus, and it kills millions or tens of millions of people. This is not one of them. So we need to tune into the facts. They told us in March that this was a threat to everybody, and all kinds of younger people were going to get permanent health damage. Well, now we know, and this is Alberta health data. COVID is a threat to about 10% of the population. If you're elderly and you're already very sick with 1 or 2 or 3 serious illnesses, then yes, it's a threat. For 90% of us, it's not a threat. What have the politicians done? They failed to protect the 10%. So you had lots of people in nursing homes die. And then they go after the 90% who are not threatened by it and take away our rights and freedoms. It's completely backwards. We need to protect the vulnerable. They said in March that the healthcare system would be overwhelmed. Well, instead, because of their fear-mongering, the hospitals were empty because people were scared to go to the hospital because they were terrified of COVID. How many people died? How many people have suffered permanent health damage because they were afraid to go to the hospital to get the medical help that they needed because of the fear-mongering of the politicians? And now we've got ongoing fear-mongering about cases. I was on the Alberta Health Services website, and any figures I'm using today, I'm talking Alberta Health Services website and other government websites, okay? So we've got the latest, supposedly 9,013 cases in Alberta. 256 people in hospital, less than 3%. And this is the same everywhere you look. Whenever you've got 100 cases, you got 97 people who are healthy or perhaps have mild symptoms of something, and only 3% of them are sick enough to go into the hospital. So all this hype about cases is blatant fear-mongering, and it's to keep the lockdowns in place. Hospital capacity. So we've got 256 COVID patients, according to Alberta Health Services, 256 COVID patients in hospital. 8,500 hospital beds. 256 of them used by COVID patients. You do the math, 3%. 3% of hospital beds. This is a crisis. This warrants lockdowns. That we got 3% of hospital beds in Alberta are being used by COVID patients, and we have to go back into all of this toxic destruction, killing businesses, denying medically necessary surgeries to people who need them. So we got fear-mongering with the cases, 97% of whom are perfectly healthy people. We've got fear-mongering on deaths. How many people die in Alberta every year? 27,000 people. How many people have died of COVID? 400. 400 COVID deaths, very sad. The other 27,000 people, that's also very sad. Why is one kind of death more sad and more tragic than the other? Why a fixation on 400, and why are they forgetting about the other 27,000 people? So they tell us, though, well, the reason that only 400 people have died of COVID is because of the lockdowns. Have you heard that before? If we hadn't had the lockdowns, we would have had, these massive numbers of deaths. And I say to Jason Kenney and Dina Hinshaw, show us the evidence. Because what Dina Hinshaw should know and what Jason Kenney should know is that speculation is not science. You can speculate that maybe the lockdown saved lives, and maybe they did, but it's speculation, it's not science. Conjecture is not science. Show us the evidence. But here's an even more important point. Even if these lockdowns have saved lives, for which there's no evidence, the onus is on politicians under the Charter. When you violate our freedom to move, our freedom to travel, our freedom to associate, our freedom to assemble, our freedom to worship, when you violate those rights and freedoms, the onus is on the government to show that those measures are actually doing more good than harm, and they have not met that onus. Jason Kenney and Dina Hinshaw should have compassion for Jerry Dunham, who died at the age of 46, the father of 2 girls. He died in hospital in Medicine Hat 2 weeks before Father's Day. Why? Because Jason Kenney and Dina Hinshaw decided that his pacemaker surgery, because his heart was functioning at 25% capacity, and he needed a pacemaker. And Dina Hinshaw and Jason Kenney decided that Jerry Dunham's pacemaker surgery was not essential. This is one of the 22,000 surgeries that they canceled. Jerry Dunham was watching what was going on in Ontario because there were cardiac patients in Ontario who died because their surgeries were cancelled as part of the lockdown measures. Ontario's health minister wasn't fazed by that. She said, oh, we're saving thousands of lives, right? Where's the evidence? Jerry Dunham looked at this, what was going on in Ontario, and he heard that there were 30 cardiac patients in Ontario who died because their surgeries got cancelled. He wrote on his Facebook page, he wrote, I hope I don't become a statistic. And then he got a heart attack, and by the time the EMS arrived and took him to the hospital, it was too late. Brain deprived of oxygen, he was dead. And the mother of his daughters, this 2 weeks before Father's Day, said it was the saddest thing she's ever seen in her life to have one of the girls saying, Daddy, Daddy, wake up, Daddy, Daddy, wake up, and another one rocking herself back and forth in a corner of the hospital room. This is what lockdowns are doing. Lockdowns are killing people. So even if they've saved lives, which again, there's no evidence that has been put forward by Dina Hinshaw or Jason Kenney that lockdowns have saved any lives. There's speculation and conjecture, which is not science. But even if the lockdowns are killing more people, where is the compassion of our charter violating, our rights and freedoms violating politicians for all of the drug overdose deaths? Where is their compassion for all the people that have committed suicide out of despair because their businesses were destroyed? Where is their compassion for people whose cancer didn't get diagnosed and they're not going to die of cancer because of lockdowns? Where is the compassion of the politicians for all the harm and the destruction? Where is the compassion of the politicians for the immigrant who spent a lifetime building up a small business destroyed by lockdown measures? Where is their compassion? Where is the compassion for the people that were denied the right to say goodbye to their loved ones in a nursing home? The Justice Centre, we are getting emails now that with these new lockdown measures, once again, these nursing homes, these long-term care facilities are going back into lockdowns, and the staff can come and go, but the loved ones, the sons, the daughters, the wives, the husbands, the grandchildren, the nieces, the nephews, the loved ones are being denied access again. This is cruel. This is wicked. This is not bringing about anything good to push these poor people in nursing homes into isolation. It's like a prison for them. This is the destruction and the death and the damage that the lockdowns are bringing. These violations of our rights and freedoms are not justified. There will be court actions. It's a matter of when, not if. However, court actions, unfortunately, they always take years. So we can't wait for successful court action to get these lockdown measures struck down. So in the interim, we have to keep on doing what we're doing right now, which is to exercise our charter freedom of expression, our charter freedom of association, our charter freedom of peaceful assembly. We have to exercise our charter freedoms to move and to travel and to go about our business and exercise those freedoms. And we have to take the message to the MLAs. As a source of information, there's some clipboards circulating. Sign up for our email newsletter. Justice Centre email newsletter goes out once every 3 weeks. We got some information, brochures, and literature there. But in the interim, don't just talk to friends and neighbors who already agree with you, but talk to your MLAs, ask for a meeting. You won't get a meeting, but you might, if you ask for a meeting, you might get a phone call. You gotta talk to these people and ask them, where's the evidence that the lockdowns have actually saved lives? Show us the evidence. And what about the harms? What about the destructions? Keep the pressure on, because unfortunately, and this is true, whenever freedom's attacked, there's always some people that actually don't mind because they don't really cherish freedom. And so there's people that are telling their MLAs that they want more lockdowns. There's doctors in Alberta that are calling for more lockdowns. So don't give up, because winners never quit and quitters never win. So don't give up. We got to keep up the pressure. So again, I want to thank Brad and the organizers. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for inviting me to speak. And keep up the fight for freedom.
Big hand. Come on, big hand. Let's go. Give it All right, guess what we're going to do now?